Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, November 22nd, 2024, and today we are going to talk about Mars, about food waste from market, and it's Feedback Friday. So let's do it. All right, so happy Friday, y'all. For a lot of us here in the U.S., this weekend before Thanksgiving is a biggie in the market gardening world. So I imagine there is a lot of harvesting and packing going on while you're listening to this podcast. For many of you, this will be the last big week of the year, signing off on your season. So I hope you can get some rest next week. Also hoping all of our friends in the Pacific Northwest are surviving the atmospheric river over there, okay? That looks wild. They are saying some parts of Northern California could receive 16 inches of rain this week, which can be, especially in an area not accustomed to heavy rainfall, but even those that are accustomed to it, a catastrophic amount. So we're thinking of you all. All right, being Friday means that it is time for Feedback Friday, where I look back at the commentary you all have contributed to the shows over the week. To recap, this week, some of the main topics we discussed were bugs on cars on Monday, information overloads on Tuesday, companion planting on Wednesday, livestock on Thursday, and as always, you all came through on the comments. The bugs on windshields topic was arguably the most engaged of the week. Comment after comment shared anecdotes of memories of bugs on windshields while people were growing up. Like this one from @Luann McCullum, who writes, quote, I so remember having to stop a number of times while driving with my mother to clean bugs off the windscreen and bumper, and there were even screens for the front of your car because of the number of insects crash landing on the cars. Now we can drive twice as far and never have to stop to clean off bugs, end quote. And also another one from PICCI and a bunch of numbers who writes, quote, 25 years ago, I used to wash my motorbike after every trip as it was covered with dead bugs. Car windshield was scraped at least once a week. Now the number of dead bugs has shrunk to less than 20%. EU funded studies last year to count the flying bugs, bug numbers from Germany to France to Italy where they live. They found a reduction of 70% of their numbers from the 1980s. It's scary, end quote. It is scary. Insect decline is wild. Now, there were a few people that brought up the aerodynamic improvements in cars, which would reduce the bug numbers, which again has been studied a bit and has not shown that that has played a major factor, but I haven't looked at those studies in depth, and I agree that aerodynamics likely does play a factor because the improvements there have been significant with new pushes for better fuel economy over the last decade and a half. That said, I remember not just the windshields, but driving through whole clouds of insects in my youth, and I do not remember the last time I saw a whole cloud of insects. That wasn't a bee swarm. There were also a couple comments that said they still do have the bug on windshield issue. I think one was in Wisconsin and one was in South Dakota. And in fact, there are likely pockets where the flying insects are still thriving, but the decline in this experience of bugs on windshields also pretty closely tracks with the decline that researchers are seeing across the board in general in insects. Maybe our cars are better at not hitting bugs, but also bugs are dying out catastrophically. That much is pretty clear. Then in regards to information overloads in farming and how confusing it can be in that episode, @Wild Acres Farm Georgia writes, quote, agree with this message 100%. We started our market garden in 2023, and I had a friend who listened to all of the farm podcast and physically handed me about 8 or 9 books, including Jesse Frost's book. Hey, thank you to that friend. I have watched the No-Till channel for some years. I said the same thing. Every book and farmer does it different. I haven't opened them up, and we just used the growing knowledge we had. It's too much contradiction. I know plants need good soil, temperatures, and nutrients. Back to basics and just do it, learn along the way, and come back to the books for reference, end quote. Yeah, I can imagine how challenging that is. There's just so much information out there right now. And I also acknowledge that this show can add to that. So if you're wondering why I sometimes just talk about stuff unrelated to farming, it's because that pressure valve needs to be released occasionally. Like go to any farming potluck and you will hear farmers talking about farming, sure, but you will also hear them talking about books and television shows and sports and parenting and a lot of stuff that isn't farming because it has to be balanced out for our own sanity. and because you can only take on so much information. On Wednesday, a couple people had mentioned the lack of scientific evidence as a reason more professional growers don't use companion planting. And to an extent, this is true. And I've said that before, that a lot of the books and articles on companion planting are not necessarily backed up by science, but that also doesn't mean they're inaccurate. Some of those ideas are passed down from earlier generations, some even coming from indigenous knowledge. So while I agree with that, I also don't want to throw out the potential of plants to assist one another, and that some of these combinations may do what they purport to do, because sometimes science just hasn't gotten there yet. But also sometimes people can just make stuff up. Both can be true. More on all that another time, though, because it's a topic deserving of its own segment for sure. One comment from that day, though, that I thought was insightful was from Ian at Ian Zeglin 5604, who I assume is our friend from Green Acres there, unless there are a ton of Ian Zeglins out in the world, which is totally possible. But either way, what's up, Ian? Anyway, he writes, quote, "At this point, I feel very strongly that interplanting is way more possible on 4-foot width production beds as opposed to the standard 30-inch bed. 30-inch just feels so tight to try and squeeze crop and beneficials in, while the 4-foot beds seem to create just enough room for more interplanting options," end quote. I think that is definitely true to a pretty large extent. I interplanted a lot when we had 30-inch beds, but it was tough. What I wound up doing more often than not is just splitting the beds in half, so like half spinach and half lettuce. And so there was some biodiversity there underground, but yeah, there was not always a lot of room for much else with only 30 inches. That would be like 75 centimeters to work with. Conversely, with something like field tomatoes in a 48-inch bed, which is the width that we use now on our farm, it feels like a waste if you don't interplant with just one row of tomatoes down a 48-inch bed. Like you're wasting a ton of space on either side. But it makes sense though. Then yesterday, talking about livestock, I liked this comment from at turdfarmer777, which excellent name, who writes, quote, "You are 100% correct. Chickens are the absolute best and worst farm animal. I would be a bit sad without my chicken compost and eggs," end quote. Yep, they do incredible things, chickens, while being incredibly frustrating. Not much to add there except that every animal has its quirks in that way. Ducks, for instance, yes, they're easier to herd, but they are also covered in down insulation, so it's almost impossible to use electric netting to fence them in and out of things because they can just get through it without getting shocked. Anyway, thanks for all the great questions and comments this week. It has been awesome in the comments section. I have the best comments section on YouTube, and it's not even close. So thank you all. All right, so we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get a question from our Patreon page on dealing with wasted produce. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right. Back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and want to support it, you can do so over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I have big ambitions to keep this show going forever, but it's going to take hiring an editor, hopefully by April, who can help me here at the farm to edit this show, which is going to take more Patreon members. So I appreciate everyone who runs over there and signs up. You all are amazing. You rock and help us get closer to that goal. Today's question comes from Patreon member Joe, who writes, quote, "I have watched most of your videos, but I don't know if you ever answered this. What do you do with the produce you don't sell? I am sure you have it worked out so that you sell most of it, but in the times you don't, what do you do with it?" End quote. Love this question, Joe. Thank you. So yeah, again, the value of a show like this is that I can talk about these more nuanced subjects that would never make a great normal Farmer Jesse video, which there will be one of those on Sunday. So surprise, and stay tuned for that. Anyway, yes, what we do with excessive produce. Obviously, the first thing we do is try to limit the amount we have. Over the years, we have gotten pretty good at knowing how much we can sell of each item, but you never know when a new vendor is going to come onto the scene and take some market share or whatever, or when you have a 10% chance of rain turn into a torrential downpour and destroy your sales that weekend. So yes, we try to minimize surplus by taking good notes throughout the season of how much sells of what. Next, if you have another outlet you can hit up after a market, that's an option for giving them a good deal on bulk extras. We used to be tied in with a restaurant where I could offload extras at a reasonable price after market, so long as they were still in good condition, like the produce stayed in the cooler all day or whatever. Also, indeed, keeping large coolers full of ice packs to ensure that stuff stays fresh will give your produce more longevity. At our farmers market, we have a nonprofit gleaner group called Glean Kentucky that repurposes unsold produce. So when we were doing markets, we could always donate to them. And of course, there are always food banks as well who will take, who hopefully will take some donations, but obviously set that up beforehand if possible so as not to just surprise them with a load of unsold lettuce. As you get better, though, most of what will come back from market will either be things like potatoes which can just be stored and brought again the next week, or it will be things that are beyond sellability, like tomatoes that were dropped on the ground or squeezed 1,000 times, greens that wilted in the sun, that sort of stuff. Those items either go into our kitchen for us to eat, or home with an employee, or as a last resort into the compost pile to become more food later on. When we had chickens, we would sometimes take the market waste to them, but preferred it going to the compost because chickens won't eat everything we grow, but the compost will. Wasting food sucks, but on a well-run farm, the food is rarely actually ever wasted. It gets turned into food for people, food for an animal, or food for the compost that turns into food for people again down the line. That said, make some connections now with food banks or gleaner groups and see what their procedures are. Some may even come to you to get extras with enough warning and even harvest stuff that is going to waste in the field. If you have a farm store, maybe you can put that in there as like a pay what you can option or a half price food option for stuff that didn't sell at market. You can also put extra food in the freezer or can it for winter eats. I know it's a lot to do a market and then come home and process food, but you won't regret that work in February. Just putting some stuff by. I'm sure others can add their procedures and ideas in the comments as well. Anyway, great question. I appreciate the support, Joe. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we will talk Mars. Space. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. So I have to admit something. I don't really care about Mars. Like the planet. Don't really care about it. I mean, is it interesting? Sure, absolutely. I'm a nerd. Everything in space is interesting. But I see companies like SpaceX working to get manned missions to Mars in the next 5 years. And the fixation with Mars as a place we should go and start cities is utterly baffling and embarrassing to me. Let me frame it like this. That tree outside right now, that tree is literally converting sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, nutrients into carbohydrates. Put another way, that tree and that grass and those plants in your garden are storing the sun's energy in roots, in exudates, in leaves, and bark, and ultimately in microbes. And then bugs, and then birds, and then livestock, and then ultimately us. You are running on the sun's energy right now. Those plants are also cleaning the air, moderating the temperature around themselves, filtering the water, managing hydrologic nitrogen and carbon cycles. And they just do that all on their own for kicks. On Mars, there are no trees, no grass, no animals. There is no known life, but frankly, no likely life, and definitely nothing like a tree or a pasture or an animal. And in order to put those things there, we would have to effectively build an expensive artificial version of the place we have for free all around us. My point is only that I hate that we view Mars as an opportunity or even an option. Mars is unequivocally not an opportunity. Earth is the opportunity, arguably the greatest in the entire universe. Mars? No. Mars is a failure. It's a failure of imagination in terms of our ability to see what the planet is doing and, moreover, what the planet can do. It's a failure of initiative to embrace and even maximize the potential of the Earth's biology. It is not a solution to the problems of the Earth. It is avoiding the problems and then moving with them to a rock and abandoning the only place we know for sure is built to and capable of housing life. Obviously, we are a ways out from getting people to Mars, but the fact that we are putting money and energy into the idea at all is among the saddest realities to me. Anyway, so as you head into your weekend, I wanted to express my appreciation for you all for at least caring enough about biology and its absolutely incredible potential to listen to the show, to start a small garden or a farm, to grow something, to engage with nature and photosynthesis. I hope we can help people grow food. I hope we can help people feed themselves and their communities. And I see a path to doing so that maximizes this wild place we live. For me, I believe our role is to steward the trees and pastures and oceans and rivers and lakes in what they're already doing or what they're capable of. And with fear of and acknowledgement of, sounding a little preachy here, our role cannot be that of a parasite that devours its host, the Earth, and looks for another, Mars or whatever. Our role is to steward, to grow, to create, to facilitate, to nurture nature. It is not to find new hosts. As the show continues, I will, without question, explore more of this idea of maximizing the Earth. So always please share any fascinating things you see or hear along the lines of ways in which we can get this planet absolutely rocking again. So much so that, I don't know, who would want to leave it? Anyway, going to wrap it up there. And as always, I will tack on a Friday field note at the end. Huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the team at No-Till Growers. If you enjoy this work, you can support it over by picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook at no-tillgrowers.com or pre-order a copy of Dan Brisebois' book, The Seed Farmer, which drops next week there as well. Another really awesome way to support us, sign up over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on the show. There were no signups last night, so no story for us today. Wah, wah. That's all right. We had a really great week. We had a lot of signups on Monday, so all good. I hope to see that again this upcoming Monday. Otherwise, thank you all for listening or watching. We'll see you next week. Bye. One of the best things about farming is snacking, right? Like, while I'm harvesting peppers, I'm snacking on peppers. Inarguably, to me, the greatest garden snack is a carbon sweet pepper, but that's for another day. Earlier today, I was just harvesting some spinach, and then I moved over to start harvesting some kale. And the thing is, spinach, great, lettuce, great, arugula, great, peppers, great, tomatoes, obviously, all those things, great. Kale, listen, I love kale. I will eat, sauteed kale. I will have it macerated in a salad, and I will put it in basically anything. I even like kale chips, but raw kale, it just isn't quite garden snack material. And inevitably, because I get in this habit of trying everything that I'm harvesting, like a good farmer should, I inevitably shove a handful of kale in my mouth and immediately regret it. So I know there are going to be people who disagree with that, but raw kale is very boring. But anyway, you all have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.